Chun Yo-woon's group continued riding south on horseback. As they moved deeper toward the southern regions, Yo-woon asked young Danhwa whether he knew the location of the Dragon Tiger Claw. Danhwa apologized and admitted that he did not know either. Yo-woon fell into silent contemplation, realizing that it was impossible to search every single one of the 18 waterways. Sensing his concern, Danhwa reassured him. Although Danhwa lacked knowledge of the geography, he explained that he knew someone who did. Meanwhile, deep within a forest roughly 10 miles away from the abandoned Sword Valley, a group of men wearing bamboo hats that concealed their faces rushed through the trees. The man leading them suddenly came to a halt, causing more than 30 men behind him to stop as well. One of them questioned the reason for the sudden stop. The man at the front explained that he could smell blood in the area. As the group reacted in surprise, he began walking in a specific direction. The others followed, pushing deeper into the bushes until they discovered something hidden from view. Within the dense forest, traces of a massive battle remained. Though someone had attempted to conceal it, the intensity of the fight had been too severe to erase completely. Dozens of trees had been cut down, bearing clear marks of violent combat. From the signs left behind, it was evident that the clash had been between warriors of superior master level. Despite the lingering evidence, there was no remaining scent. The leader ordered the men to dig at a spot where the soil appeared unnaturally piled. Obeying his command, they dug into the ground and soon uncovered arms and legs buried beneath the dirt. As the remains were exposed, it became clear that fragments of clothing still clung to them. The fabric was unmistakably part of monk robes. The men immediately recalled the only monk they knew who possessed such strength, the elder of the Wu-Tang sect, one of the Strong Nine, Hing Wunja. The man's expression turned grim as realization settled in. For a member of the Hydra and an elder of the Wu-Tang sect to have met such an end, something extraordinary must have occurred. With urgency rising within him, he resolved to head immediately toward the abandoned Sword Valley. At that moment, another man called out, drawing his attention to a sign. The man approached a large tree and looked upward. About 4 meters above the ground, markings had been carved into the bark by a sword. It was a secret symbol, one he immediately recognized. They all belonged to the same Blue Heaven Society, and this sign was unmistakably theirs. One of the men swiftly climbed the tree and retrieved an object concealed among the branches. It was a book made from unusually smooth, distinctive paper. When it was handed down, the man examined it closely. The first half of the book had been torn away, leaving only the latter portion intact. On the first remaining page was a detailed illustration of the human body. A grin spread across the man's face as he grasped the truth. This was what Hing Wunja had protected with his life, the method to reach the supreme martial physique. For centuries, martial arts had been preserved by 3 great forces: the North's Orthodox sect, the West's Unorthodox sect, and the South's heavenly demonic cult. The regions bordering these powers had long been battlefields, endlessly stained with blood. Yet amid these lands of conflict existed one place that stood apart. It was the sole neutral territory, without owner or allegiance, where all 3 forces converged. This place was known as the Silent Capital. Its neutrality did not signify peace, but rather a suffocating tension so intense that no one dared to make the first move. As they moved through the Silent Capital, Hobum reacted with uncontrolled excitement, loudly pointing out people he believed belonged to the unorthodox sect and marveling at the scars they bore. Baekji responded by shaking his head, irritated by Hobum's lack of restraint, warning him that such behavior would only draw unwanted attention. Hobum immediately deflated, his enthusiasm dampened by Baekji's words. His excitement was understandable, as this was his first time seeing such a vast city, but his tendency to speak too much remained a problem. Baekji reflected that if Monku had been present as well, the constant chatter from both of them would have been unbearable. At least Monku was not with them. She, Ho Sangwa, and the Divine Physician had been sent instead to Hubei Province. Young Danhwa informed Yowon that they only needed to proceed along that path. Yowon observed that it led into an alleyway. Danhwa guided the group into the back alleys of Meking City. The deeper they went, the darker and more unsettling the surroundings became. The streets were filled with liquor sellers and prostitutes, loudly calling out to passersby, enticing them with drinks and pleasure. Most of the people wandering the area carried the air of bandits or rough criminals. Hobum reacted loudly to the sights, staring openly and blurting out his shock at the women on display. Baekji sharply tried to stop him, irritated by his lack of restraint. While Hobum retorted defensively, Baekji could only shake his head in frustration, inwardly lamenting that Monku and Wang Hul were not present, as they would have been far better at dealing with Hobum's behavior. After walking through the alley for some time, time, Danhwa pointed toward a brightly lit 4-story building in the distance and told Yowon that it was their destination. The building was known as the House of Osang, a place that sold liquor and provided prostitution. Women dressed provocatively stood outside, actively luring customers inside. Though Yowon questioned whether such a place could truly sell information, the group decided to enter. Hobum became overwhelmed, unsure where to look as he noticed the unusually large number of prostitutes gathered there. Baekji, in contrast, kept a stiff expression and deliberately avoided turning his eyes. As they approached the entrance, prostitutes rushed toward them, dressed in red silk and attempting to wrap their arms around the group. They tried to draw them in with flirtatious gestures and attention. Baekji stiffened in shock and embarrassment when he felt a woman's body press against his arm. Hobum also became flustered when he was surrounded, growing dizzy from the sudden attention. At that moment, young Danhwa calmly stated that they wanted a spot with 3 teacups. Hearing this, the women immediately lost interest, their expressions turning disappointed, and they guided the group inside. They were led up to the 3rd floor, where the atmosphere was noticeably heavier. As they walked through, seated guests briefly glanced at them. Yowon observed that everyone present was a martial artist. Weapons were visible everywhere, ranging from swords and blades to flails and other uncommon arms. A server led them to an empty table and gestured for them to sit. On the table rested a teapot and 3 teacups, each a different color. Young Danhwa conveyed his explanation through telepathy, informing Yowon that this was the secret place where information was sold. He explained that it functioned much like the Orthodox sect's Beggars Gang or the unorthodox sect's low-class sects. As a neutral zone, it was free from the restrictions and influence of both the Orthodox and unorthodox sects, a fact the operators used to their advantage. He further explained that the 3 teacups represented the rank of the information being requested: red for low rank, blue for intermediate, and white for high rank. Yowon asked what rank their desired information fell under. Danhwa replied that it was likely intermediate. Danhwa then poured tea into the blue cup. The server soon returned and exchanged telepathic messages with Danhwa to confirm the nature of the information being requested. After listening, the server asked them to wait and headed back toward the upper floors. Before long, the server returned and informed them that their seating needed to be changed to the upper level, explaining that the owner wished to serve them personally. The mention of the owner caused young Danhwa to frown. Through telepathy, Danhwa warned Yowon that, to his knowledge, the upper floor was reserved only for guests requesting high-rank information, making the situation unusual. Yowon responded calmly, stating that they needed the information and that he sensed no danger, so proceeding should be fine. They were led upstairs, passing several rooms before the server guided them into one. Inside awaited a lavishly decorated chamber. A middle-aged man with an eye patch over his right eye stood there, with 2 large guards positioned behind him. The man rose to his feet and greeted them, introducing himself as Moon-Oh, the owner of the Osung family house, and stating that he had decided to personally serve such valuable guests. Danhwa expressed his surprise at meeting the owner directly and offered his thanks. He bowed respectfully as Moon-Oh gestured for them to take their seats, and the group sat down. Young Danhwa asked why they had been summoned to the upper floor, stating that he was certain he had only requested middle-rank information. Moon-Oh narrowed his eyes and replied that the information in question was actually classified as top rank, adding that the matter was somewhat complicated. Danhwa pressed for clarification, but Moon-Oh only laughed and retrieved an object from his pocket. It bore a seal engraved with the number 18. Moon-Oh explained that they had many supporters and that this item had been given by one of them, then asked whether they recognized who that supporter was. Upon seeing the mark, Hobum muttered in realization that it belonged to the 18 river families. Moon-Oh laughed and praised Hobum for noticing so quickly. Moon-Oh continued calmly, stating that despite their supporters, they were still willing to sell the information, telling them not to be disappointed. He then laid out his condition: if they promised that their reason for searching for the location was not to harm the 18 river families, and if they paid his price, he would reveal it. At the same time, signs of people gathering could be sensed all around the room. Hobum urgently warned that they were being surrounded, estimating that there were more than 30 people outside. Once enough people had assembled, Moon-Oh stood up and spoke aloud. He stated that he had heard young Danhwa had recently returned from the 10,000 Great Mountains, identifying him as the 4th elder. He then expressed his curiosity about Yowon, questioning who he was for someone of young Danhwa's high standing in the demonic cult to address him with such formality. Hobum and Baekji reacted with anger, but Moon-Oh only laughed, remarking that since they needed his information, he was merely stating his price. Inwardly, Muno became certain that the young man before him held a high position within the demonic cult. He concluded that he could not simply give up this information, reasoning that their search for the Dragon Tiger Claw must be of great significance, and that this would eventually lead to another valuable piece of information. Yoan then spoke, stating that he was now certain that those supporting this place were exactly who he thought they were. Mun-O, who had been looking at them with confidence, was caught off guard and reacted in confusion. In that instant, Yoan extended his hand and made a pulling gesture. A powerful force surged forward, lifting one of the guards standing behind Mun-O into the air. Internal energy was recognized at work as the guard was violently dragged forward. Yoan seized the guard by the neck as he was thrown toward him. Mun-O was shocked and shouted in alarm, demanding to know what Yoan was doing. Yoan coldly stated that he had nothing to say to a subordinate. Mun-O stood frozen in shock. The guard began to stammer in panic, unable to understand why this was happening to him. Yoan tightened his grip around the man's neck without hesitation and questioned him in return, asking why the true owner of the establishment was disguising himself as a mere guard. Mun-O, who had been acting as the manager of the Osang family house, was thrown into shock. He had been following the owner's orders, fabricating excuses to force requesters to leave. They had concluded that if Young Danwa, a high-ranking elder of the demonic cult, was serving someone with such respect, then that individual must hold an extraordinarily important position within the cult. The realization spread through Yoan's group as well. None of them had imagined that the guard Yoan was holding was actually the true owner. Mun-O hurriedly denied the accusation, insisting that the man was nothing more than his escort warrior. Yoan responded with a faint smile, remarking that such an explanation was amusing, and pointed out the overwhelming bloodthirst filling the building. Hostile energies surged from outside the room as warriors stood ready, prepared to storm in at any moment. Yoan calmly stated that such a reaction made no sense if he were truly only threatening an escort warrior. Mun-O attempted to send a telepathic message to the owner, urgently asking what they should do, but there was no possibility of receiving a response while the man's neck was firmly restrained. The true owner was seized by terror. Despite being at the early peak level, he found himself completely unable to move even a finger. He realized that if Yoan applied even slightly more strength, his neck would be crushed instantly. In that moment, he understood that there was absolutely nothing he could do. His only option was to beg and try to make Yoan leave. The owner weakly pleaded for mercy, but the tone of his voice differed from the aggressive readiness of the warriors waiting outside. The Osang family's warriors misinterpreted the situation and immediately broke through the walls to charge in. Mun-O tried desperately to stop them, but it was already too late. Weapons were swung toward Yoan's group, yet the attack was utterly ineffective. Young Danwa did not even rise from his seat. With nothing more than a single finger, he blocked the incoming swords, shattering them on contact. The sight left the attackers stunned, unable to comprehend how a sword had been broken so effortlessly. There was no contest between middle-level warriors and a superior master. The gap in power was so vast that young Danwa felt no need to stand. The strongest warrior among the attackers was only at the top master level, making them unable to overcome even Hobam, the weakest member of Yoan's group. Cries of pain echoed through the room as Hobam struck the attackers down with simple punches and kicks, not even drawing his sword. He reacted with excitement as each warrior fell. Though Hobam already possessed strength far above the average martial artist in the Yulin, being surrounded by monsters like Yoan and young Danwa had always made him appear weak by comparison. And when Hobam finally drew his sword, Blue Force Ki surged along its blade. The moment the energy manifested, all remaining warriors froze in place. Hobam laughed confidently, taunting them as he revealed that he was the weakest member of his group. Inwardly, he reflected on the insight he had gained from the sword marks at the abandoned Sword Valley. Through that experience, he had reached the early Supreme Peak level, and he realized that he had become far stronger than he once believed. At Hobam's words, the remaining warriors immediately dropped their weapons in surrender. Yoan scoffed softly and released his grip. The man collapsed to the floor, coughing violently as he struggled to breathe. After a moment, he steadied himself and spoke with forced politeness, apologizing for deceiving them and revealing his true identity as Dahyun of the Osang family house. Beside him, Mun-O introduced himself as the manager and fell to his knees as well, offering his apology. Yoan coldly stated that if the 18 waterways were sponsoring this place, then it meant they were effectively under their control. Dahyun hastily denied this, claiming that their relationship was more of a cooperative partnership rather than one of subordination. Before he could say more, Baekji grabbed the back of Dahyun's head and slammed it into the floor, warning him in an icy tone not to think about lying to Yeowon. Dahyun trembled and immediately gave in. Yeowon wasted no time and directly demanded the location of the Dragon Tiger Claw. Dahyun hesitated, faltering mid-sentence as a telepathic message message from Moon-oh reached him. Moon-oh urgently suggested clearing out the people in the special room, warning that otherwise the situation could spiral out of control. Da-hyun rejected the idea, explaining through telepathy that those people would not leave simply because they were asked. He acknowledged that they were frightening, but at least they were still reasonable. Yo-won had been listening in on their telepathic exchange from the moment he arrived. From what he gathered, there was someone in the special room whom even they feared. Da-hyun looked up at Yo-won and with visible anxiety asked him to leave for now. Yo-won questioned what he meant. Da-hyun then confessed the truth. The Yellow River Third Demon was currently inside the building. Yo-won had never heard that name before, but Young Danhwa immediately recognized it and explained the Yellow River Three Demons were infamous high-ranking figures within the 18 waterways, notorious for stealing ships, massacring men, and kidnapping women. They were a vicious group with bounties placed on their heads, yet they continued to walk freely through the city without concern. More importantly, their uncle was Gal Mojem, a member of the Hydra. The name stirred Yo-won's memory as he realized he had heard of Gal Mojem before. Danhwa elaborated further, explaining that Gal Mojem was both a member of the Hydra and one of the unorthodox sect's 8 higher-ups, ranking among the top 4. He was a supreme martial artist known for his violent temperament, yet he valued his family and comrades above all else. There had once been an incident where the ship carrying the Yellow River Three Demons was ambushed. Upon hearing the news, Gal Mojem had hunted down the perpetrators and slaughtered not only them but their entire bloodlines. That incident was the reason no one dared interfere even when his subordinates caused chaos. Yo-won calmly acknowledged the situation, noting that they were backed by an extremely powerful force. Da-hyun sent a telepathic message to Yo-won, addressing him respectfully. He revealed that the Dragon Tiger Claw was one of their supporters and explained that they provided information about merchant ships traveling along the river in exchange for protection. Continuing through telepathy, Da-hyun admitted that spies from the Dragon Tiger Claw were embedded among them. If Yo-won obtained the information he sought, Da-hyun warned, it would spell disaster for him, while the lives of Da-hyun and his family depended entirely on maintaining that relationship. Yo-won was taken aback by the revelation. Da-hyun lowered his head and struck it against the floor, apologizing aloud and stating that he could not sell the information. Through telepathy, he begged Yo-won for understanding, convinced that not even the higher-ups of the demonic cult could act against the Yellow River Three Demons. Yo-won calmly acknowledged that he had not been aware of such circumstances and asked whether the Yellow River Three Demons were currently in the building. Relieved, Da-hyun quickly confirmed that they were, explaining that they were staying in a special room on the 2nd floor. Before Da-hyun could finish speaking, Yo-won gave an order, stating that Baek-ji and Hobum should go to the 2nd floor and bring them up. They did not hesitate for even a moment. They immediately rushed out of the room to carry out the command. Da-hyun panicked, unable to comprehend what was happening. He protested desperately, insisting that Yo-won had just agreed to help them. Yo-won replied coldly that he had never said any such thing. Da-hyun's expression twisted with fear as he demanded to know what Yo-won was planning to do. In the next instant, Yo-won reached out and twisted his hand. A cracking sound echoed as the neck of a warrior standing by the wall snapped and the man collapsed lifelessly to the floor. Shock rippled through the room as everyone realized the warrior had been killed instantly. Pale faces filled the room as terror spread among everyone present. Telepathic panic erupted among the warriors as they realized a man had been killed and that they might die before the Yellow River Three Demons ever did. The instinct to escape surged through them, and the moment those thoughts formed, a smile appeared on Yo-won's face. He immediately identified them. As one person voiced confusion, Yo-won extended both hands and made a pulling motion. 2 warriors who had been concentrating their internal energy into their feet to flee were violently dragged forward. Their bodies slammed into the ground before they could take a single step. Da-hyun was stunned beyond belief. He realized that those 2 men were the spies planted by the Yellow River Three Demons. It had taken his people an entire month to identify them, yet Yo-won had exposed them in mere seconds. At that moment, footsteps echoed from the stairway. Baek-ji and Hobum entered the room, announcing that they had carried out their orders. 3 naked men in their 30s lay on the floor. They were the Yellow River Three Demons. Their bodies were covered in bruises and their blood points had been sealed, leaving them unable to move or speak. Da-hyun hastily sent a telepathic message, desperately questioning Yo-won's actions and reminding him that their house depended on those men. Yo-won answered aloud without a shred of concern, stating that he had no reason to care about Da-hyun's house. When Da-hyun reacted in confusion, Yo-won smiled coldly and made it clear that it was Da-hyun's problem alone. Da-hyun finally understood his mistake. This was not a man who could be reasoned with. Fear consumed him as he realized that everything he had built could be destroyed in an instant. Yo-won stepped toward the demon on the left and released his seal. Once able to speak, Gal Ren exploded with rage, hurling curses and threats. Hobum, enraged by his insolence, struck Gal Ren's head from behind, warning him not to speak so carelessly if he wished to live. Yo-won fixed Gal Ren with a merciless glare. He stated that he did not care who Gal Ren was, and that he would ask only one question. If Gal Ren failed to answer properly, Yo-won would cut off his head. Gal Ren responded with defiance, shouting back and demanding to know who Yo-won thought he was to threaten him. He then turned his fury toward Da-hyun, berating him for allowing this situation and shouting insults as he raged. Before Gal Ren could finish, Yo-won gave the order to kill him. Young Danhwa's blade flashed through the air and pierced Gal Ren's neck. His words were cut short as his head was severed, blood erupting from the stump and pouring across the floor. The two remaining brothers were drenched in their siblings' blood. Yo-won coldly warned them that they would be killed as well if they dared to spout nonsense and demanded the location of the Dragon Tiger Claw. Gal Mo froze in shock at the question. Fear churned violently within him. If these people were planning to ambush the Dragon Tiger Claw, betraying them would mean turning on his own comrades. Yet the killing intent radiating from Yo-won was unmistakable. Gal Mo was certain that refusal meant immediate death, and survival became his only priority. Gal Mo gave in and revealed the location. He explained that there was a mountain called Tumen Mountain, and that if one followed the Yellow River eastward for roughly 88 kilometers, the Dragon Tiger Claw could be found at the point where the river split. Yo-won turned his gaze toward Da-hyun for confirmation. Da-hyun grimly nodded, confirming that the information was true. Yo-won inwardly noted that there would be no need to sacrifice their families. Gal Mo desperately begged for his life, shouting that he had already given them what they wanted. Yo-won smiled coldly and corrected him, stating that Gal Mo was mistaken for assuming he would be spared. He had never said they would be allowed to live. Gal Mo's face drained of all color. He had betrayed his own people believing it would save him, only to realize it meant nothing. Yo-won gave the order to kill them all. Young Danhwa moved instantly. His blade flashed, severing Gal Mo's head before he could even process what was happening. Death came before awareness. Turning without pause, Young Danhwa then cut down the last brother, Gal Tek, killing him before a single word could leave his mouth. The room was drowned in silence and terror. Everyone present understood that these people showed absolutely no mercy. Da-hyun trembled inwardly as the truth of the demonic cult stood before him. The rumors were real. They were even more ruthless than the unorthodox sect. They took what they wanted and erased everything afterward. Da-hyun feared that their own end had now arrived, but instead, Yo-won simply ordered them to leave. Without hesitation, his group responded and followed him out. Da-hyun was left stunned, unable to understand why they were being spared. Overcome with fear and confusion, he desperately called out and asked why they were allowed to live. Yo-won turned back and calmly explained that Da-hyun himself had revealed the location of the Yellow River 3 demons. Because of that, they now shared responsibility. Yo-won stated that he had already obtained the information he needed, and that was the end of it. Relief washed over Da-hyun as a long breath escaped him. Muno sent a telepathic message to Da-hyun, reasoning that if the spies had been left alive, the Osang family house might have been blamed. He suggested that if everything were framed as the demonic cult's doing, responsibility might not fall on them. Yo-won intercepted their exchange and spoke aloud before leaving, remarking that he was only mentioning it because they likely did not know, but there was still one more spy among them. Da-hyun's eyes widened in shock at the statement. Panic surged through him as the thought struck that another spy remained hidden. He immediately shouted an order, forbidding anyone in the room from leaving. Confusion spread among the warriors as Da-hyun enforced the command, while Yo-won and his group calmly exited the room. Once outside and moving through the alleyways, Hobum asked Yo-won how he had managed to uncover yet another spy. Yo-won responded with a laugh and admitted that it had been a lie. Hobum froze in confusion until realization dawned on him. Young Danhwa expressed his amazement, recognizing the tactic immediately. Yo-won had deliberately sown distrust among them, ensuring they would waste their time hunting for a spy that did not exist, tearing apart their own trust in the process. Yo-won then urged the group to move quickly while the Osang family house remained occupied. Their next objective was clear. They needed to reach the divine physician's granddaughter as fast as possible. After leaving Meeking City, Chun Yo-won and his group traveled east along the Yellow River for roughly 50 miles. As they rode beside the river, the sight before them drew quiet reactions. The sunset reflected across the flowing water, creating a breathtaking scene as the river stretched endlessly into the distance. Yo-won observed that the river truly split at this point. Young Danhwa examined the terrain and determined that the narrower branch likely led toward Tumen Mountain, guiding the group in that direction. After climbing through the mountain path, they came upon dozens of shacks tracks concealed behind the ridgeline. Hidden beside the river, the settlement revealed itself as the base of the Dragon Tiger Claw. Its position made travel by boat easy, marking it as an ideal hideout for river pirates. Hobum let out a breath of amazement as he realized they had finally found the place. Having crossed the mountain, the village lay clearly in view, its concealment explaining why it had been so difficult to locate. Yowon carefully scanned the area and noted the presence of numerous watchtowers. Danhwa immediately warned that approaching recklessly would likely get them spotted. With so many watchtowers in place, the occupants could not be ordinary bandits. Yowon's gaze then shifted to a massive ship docked nearby, its size standing out sharply. Danhwa sensed something off, recalling that while the 18 waterways use sizable vessels, they were usually built for speed rather than sheer scale. Hobum pointed out that men were loading large amounts of supplies onto the ship and dismantling one of the huts nearby. More than 20 men were hauling goods on pull carts toward the docks. Danhwa concluded that the group appeared to be preparing to move. Yowon acknowledged that river bandits were known to relocate every few months, and it seemed their timing had coincided with that moment. Danhwa assessed the situation further and suggested that this movement might actually work in their favor. Using the chaos of relocation, they could potentially retrieve the Divine Physician's granddaughter without provoking a large-scale battle. Yowon agreed, but stated that they needed a clearer understanding of the situation within the village before taking any action. Yowon called Baekji's name, and Baekji immediately responded. Yowon pointed toward the nearest watchtower, where two watchers stood on guard, and asked whether Baekji could quietly bring them over. Baekji answered that he would try. Baekji, who specialized in kicking techniques, was also the most proficient among the 6 swords in movement and stepping skills. After assuring Yowon that he would return soon, Baekji slipped away silently. Within moments, he had already reached the watchtower. From their position on the mountain, Yowon and the others could clearly observe everything. Baekji swiftly climbed up and snapped the neck of one watcher. He lifted the unconscious man and began climbing down. At that moment, something unexpected occurred. Voices rang out as new watchers arrived for a shift change. Baekji attempted to rush them, but before he could act, Hobum and young Danhwa appeared behind the newcomers and killed them instantly. More watchers were already approaching the tower, so Hobum and young Danhwa moved in quickly to support Baekji, preventing their presence from being exposed. Hobum teased Baekji afterward, but Baekji denied being startled and simply shook his head. Young Danhwa ordered them to stay quiet and move the bodies first. Hobum and Baekji carried the corpses into nearby bushes, away from the watchtower, while young Danhwa lifted the unconscious watcher and brought him back to Yowon. He placed his sword against the watcher's neck and warned him that he would be killed if he made any noise. The man nodded frantically in fear. Young Danhwa questioned him about why everyone seemed to be moving that day. Trembling, the watcher answered that they had heard their location had been exposed. Yowon reflected inwardly, puzzled. They had arrived immediately after dealing with the Yellow River 3 demons, so he could not understand how the information could have leaked so quickly. Young Danhwa pressed the watcher, demanding to know where the information had come from. The man, shaking uncontrollably, insisted that he truly did not know. Young Danhwa proceeded to ask the most critical question and demanded to know the whereabouts of the Divine Physician's granddaughter. The watcher reacted with confusion, claiming not to understand who Danhwa was referring to. Danhwa pressed the blade closer against the man's neck, sending him into a panic, and warned him not to attempt deception. The watcher frantically insisted that he knew nothing about any granddaughter and claimed that there was no one currently being held from outside the group. Yowon found the response strange. Hing Wonja could not have lied under the effects of the drug, which meant something did not add up. Yowon directly asked whether the watcher knew a woman named Gam Miyang, describing her muscular build and the mole on her nose. The watcher hesitated, then suddenly realized who they meant, blurting out that she was known as the First Mate's Lute, quickly correcting himself and calling her the First Mate's Woman. Baekji echoed the words in disbelief, while Hobum reacted angrily, thinking of how the Divine Physician would rage if he heard such a thing. Yowon immediately asked where she was. The watcher stammered and said she was currently on a ship. Yowon clarified whether it was the large ship they had seen earlier. The watcher corrected him, explaining that the leaders were all on the ship stationed out on the river. Yowon was taken aback. He immediately climbed a tall tree and looked out over the river. From above, he spotted 5 battleships anchored in the middle of the water, positioned just before the river reconnected with the Yellow River. Frustration welled up within him. Roughly an hour later, Chun Yowon and Hobum reached a small fishing village along the narrower river branch. The villagers survived by fishing, and Yowon managed to purchase a small boat from them. The two then set sail along the river, intending to rendezvous with the others at the predetermined time. Elsewhere, the pirates were busy loading supplies from multiple ships. Voices rang out as orders were given, praising the work and instructing everyone to rest, since the remaining cargo would be moved onto the final ship early the next morning. Cheers cheers erupted in response, only to be immediately shut down by warnings that the captain was sleeping. Complaints followed, lights were ordered to be turned off, and the noise gradually died down. Hidden within one of the cargo holds were young Danhwa and Baekji, lying in wait as the chaos above slowly settled. Later that night, young Danhwa quietly questioned how long they had been inside the ship. Baekji estimated that nearly 4 hours had passed. Danhwa sensed the surroundings and noted that everything had grown quiet, with no nearby presence remaining. He judged that it was finally safe to move. The two slipped out swiftly, communicating only through telepathy. Baekji reported that the infiltration had been largely successful. Danhwa reminded him that guards were scheduled to arrive around 1 in the morning, leaving them with very little time. They needed to move fast. Baekji confirmed that the Demon Lord and Hobom were expected to arrive by midnight using a boat. Danhwa acknowledged this and emphasized that they had to secure the granddaughter before that happened. Baekji spotted a flag marking a section of the ship and identified the room near the stern as the first mate's quarters. 2 guards stood watch directly outside the door. Baekji stated that they would have to knock them out. Danhwa told him he would give the signal, assigning Baekji the guard on the right while he took the left. Baekji nodded. In perfect coordination, the two moved at once, striking the backs of the guards' necks and rendering them unconscious without a sound. Baekji volunteered to stand watch while Danhwa entered the room. Danhwa slipped inside silently. The first mate was asleep, lying beside a woman. Danhwa immediately snapped the first mate's neck and sealed his blood points, ensuring he could not move or awaken. Danhwa then examined the woman closely and realized she bore a striking resemblance to the divine physician. He gently shook her awake. The moment she stirred, Danhwa sealed her mouth with his palm and sent her a telepathic message, telling her to remain quiet. He explained that her grandmother had sent them, and that they were there to help her escape if she was willing to come quietly. She glanced anxiously back at the first mate. Danhwa reassured her that the man had only been knocked unconscious. As they left the room, Danhwa introduced Baekji as his companion. He explained that she had not learned martial arts and instructed Baekji to carry her on his back. Baekji lifted her with visible frustration, inwardly cursing the familiarity of the situation as it reminded him of the past. They fled at full speed, carefully avoiding leaving any traces behind. However, just as they were making progress, Danhwa caught the sharp sound of a whistle. In the next instant, hurried footsteps closed in on them. Shouts erupted as pirates discovered their presence, screaming that enemies had infiltrated the area and declaring it an ambush. Young Danhwa frowned inwardly, unable to understand how he had failed to sense any hostile presence beforehand. More pirates poured in with torches raised high, yelling for them to be captured. Within moments, hundreds of men surrounded them in a wide circle, sealing off every possible escape route. Amid the chaos, a voice rang out, declaring that everything had happened exactly as predicted. Another voice answered calmly, admitting that it had only been a guess that happened to succeed. Dragon Tiger Claw's captain, Bak Hoshian, burst into loud laughter, openly praising the cleverness behind the plan. He mocked the situation, stating that he had never expected intruders to target the first mate's wife. Baekji and Danhwa were both stunned by what they heard. The words echoed in their minds, leaving them momentarily confused. At that instant, Baekji sensed something wrong and spun around. Gamyang drove a dagger into his back, pain surging through his body. Baekji reacted instinctively, forcefully shoving her away and staggering backward to create distance. Shock and disbelief flooded Baekji's thoughts. He could not understand why the divine physician's granddaughter would attack him. In that moment, the meaning behind the phrase, "the first mate's woman," became horrifyingly clear. She had known they were coming. A man wearing a bamboo straw hat stepped forward and calmly ordered them to surrender. He stated that even if they had managed to kill Hing Wunja, they would never be able to stand against all of them combined. He added that escape was impossible, especially with the violent currents of the surrounding waters. Danhwa realized the truth all at once. This had been a trap from the very beginning. The ships had been deliberately stationed in this location to isolate them and cut off any retreat. He shook his head and let out a quiet sigh, acknowledging his mistake. The man smiled, interpreting Danhwa's reaction as surrender, and ordered his men to bind them. One of the pirates approached with a rope, laughing as he told them to stay still, promising not to hurt them. Before the pirate could take another step, the rope was cleanly sliced in half. Young Danhwa stood motionless, his blade now unsheathed. Baekji moved to his side, the two standing back to back as they scanned their surroundings. The man scoffed, clicking his tongue as he reiterated that escape was impossible in that place. Young Danhwa calmly responded that no one had ever said there were only two of them. The man mocked the statement, dismissing it as nonsense and beginning to argue that no one could possibly arrive in the middle of the river. Before he could finish, a sharp surge of hostile energy washed over him. Alarmed, he immediately dashed toward the edge of the ship to look out. The moment his eyes caught sight of what lay beyond, he froze in shock. Chun Yo-won was flying toward the ship, holding Hobum in his arms. Hobum, who had not heard Yo-won announce his movement beforehand, rolled awkwardly across the deck when he was dropped. He quickly got to his feet, only to stiffen in shock as he realized that countless pirates were surrounding them. The sheer number made his breath catch. The pirates themselves stared in disbelief at Yo-won, who remained suspended in the air. Flying air sword, an art spoken of only in legends, a technique considered theoretical unless one possessed extreme mastery in both swordsmanship and stepping techniques. Yo-won calmly assessed the situation. There were roughly 300 enemies present, but only 2 of them carried truly dangerous presences. The man wearing the bamboo hat appeared to be around the evolutionary realm, while the one radiating power at the ultimate supreme peak could only be the leader of the Dragon Tiger Claw. The man in the bamboo hat inwardly confirmed his suspicion. This had to be the person who killed the Wu-Tang sect elder. With unease creeping into his voice, the man questioned whether Yo-won might be a martial arts master of the Berserk Saber from the 6 martial arts sect. Yo-won reasoned inwardly that the man must have seen the traces left behind at the abandoned Sword Valley, and the blue waistband gave everything away. He stated with certainty that the man belonged to the Blue Heaven Society. The man flinched in shock, unable to comprehend how his affiliation had been exposed so easily. At that moment, young Danhwa sent a telepathic message to Yo-won, warning him that the Divine Physician's granddaughter had already sided with them. She had worked together with the man in the bamboo hat, acting as bait to lure them into this trap. Yo-won fixed his gaze on Gam Mi-yang, and she recoiled as his killing intent washed over her. He declared that he would be taking the person they had kidnapped. Before anyone could react, Yo-won, still in the air, made a pulling gesture with his hand. Gam Mi-yang was violently lifted from among the pirates, dragged through the air, and hurled toward young Danhwa and Baekji. Several pirates lunged forward to stop it, but they were far too slow. Baekji immediately disarmed her, wrenching the dagger from her grasp and ordering her to remain still this time. Yo-won then descended from his sword and landed on the deck. He ordered Baekji to protect her. Drawing the white dragon blade from his waist, Yo-won swung it across the deck. Pure white blade chi erupted outward, carving a deep, clean line into the wooden floor of the ship. The pirates froze in confusion as Yo-won coldly warned that anyone who crossed that line would be killed. The man in the bamboo hat hurriedly shouted for Yo-won to wait, attempting to calm the situation. He acknowledged Yo-won's overwhelming strength, but questioned whether he truly believed he could safely take the woman away from an isolated ship like this. Yo-won scoffed and asked whether the man was worried, suggesting they simply try and see what happened. The man realized inwardly that Yo-won was completely unfazed by threats. He then sent a telepathic message to Captain Bak Hoseon, asking whether the baby might be in the cabin. Bak Hoseon responded with surprise, questioning whether the baby was to be used, and explained that the first mate had asked him to hide the baby in the man's residence, believing no one else knew about it. The man ordered him to apply pressure. Bak Hoseon reluctantly agreed. The man reasoned inwardly that if the Divine Physician's granddaughter could not be rescued, then the Divine Physician would never aid Yo-won. Captain Bak Hoseon then spoke aloud, revealing that her husband and baby were in their hands and questioning whether she still believed help would come. Young Danhwa flinched in shock at the mention of a baby. Baekji finally understood the desperation behind Gam Mi-yang's actions. Realizing that her child was being held hostage, he recognized that she had been left with no choice but to cooperate. One of the pirates shouted that the baby in the cabin would be killed the moment the captain gave the order. Captain Bak Hoseon smiled coldly and made the threat explicit, declaring that if even a single hair on his subordinates was touched, or if Gam Mi-yang escaped the ship, the baby would die. Rage exploded from Hobum as he condemned them inwardly for taking a newborn hostage. The man in the bamboo hat attempted to suppress further chaos, insisting that handing the woman over was the only way everyone would be allowed to leave alive. Yo-won calmly questioned what would happen if he refused. Gam Mi-yang froze in shock. Her crying stopped, and she stared at Yo-won with wide, trembling eyes. The man in the bamboo hat urgently sent a telepathic message, mocking Yo-won and asserting that such a choice would kill the Divine Physician's great-grandchild, rendering any future help impossible. Yo-won ignored the message entirely and gave a single emotionless order for the baby to be killed. Shock rippled through the pirates. The man could not believe what he was hearing and questioned Yowon's sanity, but Yowon showed no hesitation. In the next instant, Yowon hurled the white dragon blade into the mass of pirates. The blade pierced straight through 6 men in a single line, killing them instantly, before returning cleanly to Yowon's hand at his call. Bok Hossein erupted in fury and panic, demanding to know whether Yowon truly intended for the baby to die. Yowon responded casually, pointing out that Bok Hossein himself had declared the baby would be killed if his men were harmed. Yowon questioned whether the captain's threat had merely been an empty bluff. Realizing his authority was being challenged, Bok Hossein forced himself to maintain the act. He raised his hand and gave the order that the baby was to be killed the moment his hand dropped. The surrounding pirates responded shakily, echoing the command to maintain the illusion. Bok Hossein issued a final warning, but before he could finish, Yowon's blade flashed like lightning. Bok Hossein's raised left arm was severed midair and fell to the deck. Bok Hossein collapsed, clutching his shoulder as he screamed in agony. The pirates were thrown into absolute shock. Yowon smirked and coldly urged them to carry out the order, reminding them that their captain's arm had dropped and that they had been commanded to kill the baby. Terror seized the pirates. None of them moved. Killing a baby that was not even present on the ship was impossible. As Bok Hossein writhed on the deck in pain, Yowon stepped forward and stomped him down without mercy. Bok Hossein screamed again as Yowon exposed the truth, stating that such crude bluffing would never work on him. Young Danhwa watched in stunned silence. He wondered whether Yowon had known the truth from the very beginning. At times, it felt as though Yowon could read minds or overhear even the faintest whispers of intent. Danhwa understood now how Yowon had defeated the sixth sex. Yet one problem remained unresolved in his mind: the woman. With a child involved, her actions could not be predicted, and that uncertainty lingered heavily in the air. The man in the bamboo hat ground his teeth in fear and frustration. He could not understand how Yowon had realized that the baby was not on the ship. With no other choice left, he decided they had to try killing Yowon while his attention remained on the captain. He sent a telepathic message, calling out to Homeng. A warrior hidden among the pirates responded, one of the Blue Heaven Society. The man instructed him to buy time, while Homeng swam to the docks to retrieve the baby. If anything went wrong along the way, he ordered him to kill the baby without hesitation. Homeng faltered at the command, shaken by the thought of killing an infant, but he ultimately agreed. Carefully, he slipped away toward the rear of the ship. The man hardened his resolve inwardly, determined to see whether Yowon would remain so confident once the baby was truly brought into play. Meanwhile, Captain Bok Hossein coughed violently and begged for his life, promising to let them go and even offering to hand over the baby if Yowon spared him. Yowon looked down at him indifferently and remarked that Bok Hossein's companion clearly did not share that intention. Confused and panicked, Bok Hossein demanded to know what he meant, only for Yowon to state that there was no longer any need to speak with him at all. As Bok Hossein screamed and pleaded, Yowon increased the pressure of his foot against the captain's chest. Bones cracked beneath the force, and blood burst from Bok Hossein's mouth as his screams turned hoarse and broken. The sight drove several pirates into a blind rage. They charged at Yowon, shouting as they swung their weapons, only to realize too late that Yowon was no longer there. Their attacks cut through empty air. Yowon had already appeared near the front of the ship. He lifted his arm and made a sweeping motion toward the corpses of the slain pirates. In response, the swords those men had wielded rose into the air on their own. Terror erupted among the pirates as they screamed in disbelief, panic spreading as they tried to flee. The swords did not pursue them. Instead, Yowon stepped to the edge of the ship and looked out over the river. He shouted toward the man in the bamboo hat, stating that he could see them swimming away. He questioned whether the man truly believed swimming through the river would keep them out of reach. Realization struck the man instantly. Yowon had already seen through everything. The man launched himself forward in a desperate ambush, rushing straight at Yowon. Before he could even complete his attack, Yowon's saber flashed. The strike sent the man flying backward, his body hurled away as a shrill cry escaped him. The man was left stunned, unable to comprehend how effortlessly his surprise attack had been neutralized. Yowon's hand then reached out toward the river, and 6 swords immediately shot out like lightning toward the river. Yowon glanced back at the man and dismissed his actions as shallow tricks, making it clear that such tactics were nowhere near enough to disrupt his concentration. Before the man could react further, several pirates were caught completely unprepared. Swords pierced through their bodies without warning, killing them instantly and dragging their lifeless forms down into the river. Panic spread, but not everyone was struck. Homeng and another man reacted just in time, cursing as they dove deep underwater. The sword that had cut down 5 men lost its momentum as it traveled too far from the ship, sinking helplessly into the river. Seeing this, the man felt a surge of relief. Even a supreme master, it seemed, could not maintain control control over a sword across such a distance. Seizing on that moment, the man declared that even Yowon would not be able to stop them. He insisted that Yowon already knew where they were heading and demanded that Yowon finally admit that the threat had been real all along. Yowon responded by calmly shaking his head and turning away. He called out to young Danhwa. Danhwa immediately responded. He released his grip on his blade, allowing it to hover motionlessly in midair. In the next instant, Danhwa stepped onto the blade itself. With a powerful sweeping motion of his arm, Yowon sent the blade streaking out from the ship, carrying Danhwa with it. The man stared in stunned disbelief as the blade shot across the distance toward the shore. When it drew close enough to land, Danhwa leapt cleanly off and landed firmly on the ground, already moving to intercept those who believed they had escaped. Yowon calmly addressed the man, stating that he would also be taking the baby with him. The remark ignited the man's fury. He raged inwardly, convinced that Yowon could not possibly know where the baby was hidden. Yet when Yowon casually identified the captain's quarters as the location, the man was struck speechless. Shock rippled through his thoughts. He was certain he had spoken only through the frequency whispering technique. It should have been impossible for Yowon to overhear. Realizing that neither the divine physician nor the baby was the immediate issue anymore, the man concluded that Yowon himself had to be killed at all costs. Whether by drowning or any other means, escape was now the priority so he could report this disaster to the Blue Heaven Society. With one evolutionary realm warrior already having escaped, he reasoned that if all of his subordinates attacked at once, they might at least be able to restrain Yowon. He urgently sent a telepathic message to the first mate, berating him for freezing in place despite the captain's death. With more than 300 men present, he demanded to know whether they intended to break their pledge and do nothing. The first mate hesitated inwardly, overwhelmed by the question of how anyone was supposed to kill such a monster. The man continued pressing, fuming that they were supposed to be the heroes of the 18 waterways, not cowards paralyzed by fear. At that instant, Blue Force Chi tore through the air. The man barely managed to dodge in time. Had he been a fraction slower, his head would have been severed. Even so, the attack carved through dozens of pirates behind him, slicing through necks and chests in a single merciless sweep. Bodies collapsed almost simultaneously. In the blink of an eye, Chun Yo-woon was already standing directly in front of him. The man twisted his body and raised his blade defensively. Yo-woon struck down without hesitation. Though the blade blocked the blow, the overwhelming force sent the man crashing hard onto the wooden deck. Desperation surged through his thoughts. He realized he had to escape. He began concentrating his chi into his back, intending to use Yo-woon's own power against him to flee. Before he could recover, the force drove his body straight through the ship's floor. The wood shattered beneath him, and he dropped out of sight below the deck. The man convinced himself that Yo-woon would not pursue him while the divine physician's granddaughter remained behind. He intended to break through the floor and escape at once. Before he could fall any farther, his body abruptly froze in midair. Yo-woon had restrained him with force energy alone. The man's eyes widened in pure shock as the realization struck: telekinesis. In that fleeting instant while he was suspended, Yo-woon was already standing on the lower deck beneath him. The man panicked, cursing as he realized how quickly Yo-woon had moved. As his body began to drop again, he hurriedly deployed his blade formation, sending his attack crashing downward toward Yo-woon. He declared that Yo-woon had made a mistake by taking the lower ground. Yo-woon showed no concern. He coldly stated that they would see who was mistaken. With that, the white dragon blade erupted with overwhelming blade chi. The berserk saber god's martial art, Dragon's Ascension, surged upward like a violent storm. The man's confidence shattered instantly. He could not comprehend how his descending power, which should have been stronger, was being completely overwhelmed. His blade formation was crushed without resistance, swallowed by the ascending storm of blade chi. The assault did not stop there. The violent force chi spiraled around his body, tearing into him from every direction. Agony consumed him as his flesh was shredded and ripped apart. The pain was so unbearable that death seemed preferable. Before it could go that far, Yo-woon abruptly withdrew his control. The storm vanished in an instant, but both of the man's arms were severed below the elbows. Screaming in agony, the man collapsed onto the deck. Yo-woon calmly approached him and noted that his hat had been destroyed, yet his face was still unrecognizable. He dismissed it as irrelevant. Placing his hand beneath the man's abdomen, Yo-woon prepared his next action. The man flinched violently and screamed in terror, demanding to know what was being done to him. Yo-woon answered simply and carried it out. With a precise release of power, Yo-woon shattered the man's internal energy. Excruciating pain surged through every every wound at once, overwhelming his consciousness. Unable to endure it, the man lost consciousness on the spot. Yowon sealed the man's blood points and hurled his body through the air with force energy toward Hobum and Baekji. He ordered Hobum to make sure the man did not die, and Hobum immediately acknowledged. Yowon then turned his gaze toward the remaining pirates and declared that it was their turn. The pirates were thrown into absolute terror by what they had just witnessed. Screams erupted as they scattered in all directions, some shouting to run, others leaping toward the river without a second thought. Their numerical advantage meant nothing in the face of fear. Yowon calmly questioned who had given them permission to leave. He raised both hands in a grasping motion, and the weapons the pirates had dropped while fleeing instantly rose into the air. Around 60 weapons floated above the deck. Yowon issued a command to NANO, activating self-targeting mode. NANO's voice echoed within his mind as it locked onto 60 separate targets. Target markers appeared over pirates who were desperately trying to escape. The weapons shot upward and began circling the ship, all pointed outward. The pirates froze in horror as they saw dozens of weapons suspended in midair. Murmurs of disbelief spread among them as fear rooted them in place, unable to accept what they were seeing. With a flick of his finger, Yowon initiated the attack. All 60 weapons launched at once. Blades tore through the air in every direction, striking down their targets without mercy. Screams filled the ship as chaos erupted. Pirates tried to flee, begged to survive, and stumbled over one another as the deck descended into slaughter. With weapons blocking every escape route, the ship turned into a blood-soaked battlefield. Those who attempted to jump into the water were cut down mid-movement. Others were struck where they stood. Blood sprayed across the deck as bodies collapsed one after another. Escape was impossible. The ships were bound together by thick chains, preventing anyone from breaking away. Amid the panic, one of the leaders shouted an idea, urging them to destroy the chains. They remembered that the flying weapons lost control over long distances, and with the river's rapid current, drifting away might save them. Driven by desperation, pirates rushed toward the chains connecting the ships and began hacking at them, shouting for everyone to hurry. Yowon observed their attempt with mild interest and remarked that if that was their plan, then he would help them. Several of the air swords that had been slaughtering the pirates suddenly veered upward and shattered the chains binding the ships together. Confusion erupted among the pirates. They could not understand why he was helping them escape, yet terror immediately followed that confusion. None of them believed he would actually let them live. Before that hope could even take shape, more air swords changed direction and pierced through the bottoms of the other ships. Massive holes opened beneath the hulls, and water began flooding in at once. Panic exploded as the ship started to sink. Realization struck too late. Yowon was deliberately destroying every ship except the one he stood on. Desperate, the pirates shouted to raise the anchor, hoping the violent current of the river might carry them away. But the sinking vessels refused to move as intended. Their final attempt collapsed when one of the pirates was skewered mid-action, his body dropping lifelessly to the deck. A leader screamed the fallen man's name in despair. His strength left him as he slumped down and stared at Yowon in horror. In his mind, Yowon was no longer human. This was hell made flesh. Sword chi pierced through him moments later. Blood splattered as his scream was cut short, joining the countless others. The massacre ended with hundreds of corpses strewn grotesquely across the sinking ships. Hobum cried out in awe, praising Yowon for annihilating so many enemies at once. Nearby, Gammyang let out a muffled moan. Her sealed blood points prevented her from screaming, but tears streamed from her reddened eyes as she witnessed the slaughter unfolding before her. Baekji could not understand her reaction. He told her that it was almost over and urged her to endure just a little longer, promising that he would bring her baby back soon. Instead of relief, she glared at him with fierce resentment, her muffled protest filled with anger. Hobum glanced at her uneasily and sent a telepathic message to Baekji, admitting that he did not want to think this way, but it seemed as though she was furious at them, as if she never wanted to be rescued in the first place. At the same time, 4th Elder Young Danhwa swiftly eliminated the remaining pirates stationed on the watchtower and slipped into the half-dismantled shack. Another pirate on guard was silenced instantly as Danhwa snapped his neck and concealed the body in a corner. Danhwa quickly identified the captain's shack, unmistakable with its large tiger pelt draped over the entrance. Sensing two presences inside, Danhwa entered carefully. A middle-aged woman sat inside, gently cradling a baby. She looked up in shock and tried to cry out, but before a sound could escape, Danhwa sealed her blood points, rendering her unconscious. He caught the baby before it could fall and gently pressed its blood point as well, putting it into a a deep sleep. Danhwa moved without delay and returned to the riverbank near the ships. The sight before him made him freeze. When he had left, the battle had not even begun, yet now the other ships were gone entirely. Even the massive cargo ship was sinking into the river. Yowon had wiped them out in an incredibly short span of time. The realization sent a chill through Danhwa. Even he felt a trace of fear. A telepathic signal reached him, guiding him toward the mountain. Hobum was waving from behind a hill. Danhwa hurried over and found Yowon's group concealed among the bushes. Danhwa reported that he had completed the task. Yowon checked the baby and nodded in approval. Danhwa's eyes then shifted to Baekji, who was hanging a blood-soaked man from a tree. With both forearms severed, it was obvious who had done this. Danhwa inwardly noted once again that anyone who opposed Chun Yowon inevitably lost an arm, or both. Memories of the many princes crippled during the competition resurfaced, sending another shiver through him. His attention returned to Gam Miang. Unable to move due to sealed blood points, she was trembling and crying uncontrollably. Danhwa asked Hobum what was wrong. Hobum admitted he was unsure. They had not released her because something felt off, and she had been like this the entire time, looking at them as if they were villains. Danhwa considered the possibility that she was panicking because she had not seen her baby. He stepped forward and showed her the child. He informed her that her baby was safe. The moment Gam Miang saw the baby, her eyes filled with relief. Yowon instructed young Danhwa that it was safe to release her pressure points. Danhwa agreed and immediately undid the seals. The moment Gam Miang was freed, she began screaming uncontrollably. Danhwa reacted at once, clamping his hand over her mouth and warning her sharply that if she screamed again, he would seal her pressure points once more. Her eyes darted in panic before she nodded in submission. Gasping for breath, she accused them of killing her husband by letting him drown underwater and demanded to know why she should feel any gratitude for that. The words stunned young Danhwa, Baekji, and Hobum. Realization settled in immediately. She was not an innocent captive, but someone aligned with the pirates, and there would be no cooperation from her. At that moment, the man tied to the tree regained consciousness due to the noise. Yowon proceeded to interrogate him under the effects of the truth serum. The man revealed that the Blue Heaven Society was a secret organization belonging to the Orthodox faction, supposedly created to make the skies blue. It was led by a society leader, followed by 5 higher-ups known as the Heaven Master, Earth Master, Human Master, Yin Master, and Young Master. The society was composed entirely of Orthodox faction martial artists, and its stated purpose was to eliminate all who abandoned Orthodox morals in order to create a righteous world. Young Danhwa expressed his surprise that such an extreme group could exist within the Orthodox faction. Hobum reacted with disgust, remarking that they were deranged for indiscriminately killing those associated with the unorthodox faction and even the demonic cult. Baekji added that the society cared nothing for the process, only the result they desired, and did not deserve to call itself orthodox. Yowon asked whether the 5 higher-ups were ranked by superiority. The man replied that aside from the society leader, all 5 were equal in power. Yowon ordered him to reveal their identities. The man immediately began resisting, struggling with all his will to suppress the truth. Yowon observed inwardly that although the man's dantian had been weakened, his cultivation level gave him exceptional mental resilience. Despite having been given far more truth serum than usual, he was still holding out. Forcing the words out through pain, the man revealed that the Heaven Master was Namgung Gyeong of the Namgung sect. Young Danhwa reacted in shock at the name. The man continued, stating that the Earth Master was the wise one of the Wu-Tang sect, and that the Yin Master was Tang Pilsen of the Sichuan Tang sect. Before he could continue, the man convulsed again, violently resisting. NANO warned that the excessive amount of truth serum was beginning to damage his brain. In a final burst, the man screamed out that the society leader was Peng Nuwol of the Peng sect before his breathing became dangerously weak. NANO reported that his condition was rapidly deteriorating. Yowon cursed inwardly as he realized it was pointless to push further. The man's dantian had already been destroyed, yet Yowon still needed him to endure long enough to reveal the truth about the society leader. Snapping his fingers sharply, Yowon demanded to know who the society leader was. The man barely managed to force out that only the Heaven Master knew the leader's true identity. With that, his head slumped forward. Young Danhwa examined him closely and confirmed that he was dead. Yowon concluded that this meant only Namgung Gyeong knew who the society leader truly was. Danhwa agreed and explained the gravity of that name. Namgung Gyeong was known as the Divine Mandate Swordsman, effectively the head of the 5 great sects. He was also the 3rd-ranked master among the 7 17 masters of the Orthodox Murim Alliance and the commander of the Demon Slayer Squad, an execution unit that even dealt with the demonic cult. Reaching someone of that stature would be extraordinarily difficult. Yowon acknowledged the difficulty, but noted that they had still gained valuable information. Danhwa pointed out that skilled martial artists were nearby, likely members of the Blue Heaven Society. Yowon agreed. The group quietly discussed their next steps in hushed whispers. Danhwa reasoned that as long as they dealt with the body, no one would know what had happened. The divine physician would grieve, but there was no alternative. Dread washed over Gamyang as she listened. Panic seized her as she asked whether they intended to kill her, insisting that she believed they had come to rescue her. Yowon replied calmly that they had come for her only because she was the divine physician's granddaughter. Beyond that, she had no further value, and her allegiance to the pirates had discarded even that purpose. Yowon spoke softly, almost whispering, remarking that it was fortunate her baby was asleep. Gamyang's face drained of all color. Before she could finish forming her words, Yowon swung his hand. A violent surge of force snapped her neck, twisting it unnaturally. With a final gasp, her neck bone shattered and her life ended instantly. Unbeknownst to them, the man tied to the tree was not dead. He had been feigning unconsciousness and had witnessed everything. Terror consumed him as he realized they had truly killed the divine physician's granddaughter. Yowon noticed the subtle rhythm of the man's breathing. He stepped forward without hesitation and seized the man by the neck. The man's eyes flew open to find Yowon staring down at him. Yowon stated coldly that he had known all along that the man was pretending to sleep. The man froze in terror. Yowon tightened his grip and told him that it was now his turn. Under the cover of a dark night, with only a handful of torches casting faint light, a lone figure appeared at the Dragon Tiger Claw's base near the Yellow River, deep within the surrounding forest. Two enormous swords were strapped across his back in a crisscross pattern, and a tiger rested against his shoulder. As he entered the village, he paused in surprise. The timing felt wrong. By now, the pirates should have returned to rest. Still, it was not his concern. His purpose was to see her, not to deal with the pirates. As he approached the shacks, an uneasy sensation washed over him. He noticed a corpse folded awkwardly behind the bushes. The neck clearly snapped. Confusion sharpened his gaze. Someone had deliberately hidden the body. As he focused his senses, his expression darkened further. He could feel around 50 presences nearby, yet they were all women and children. He set the tiger down and forcefully banged on a shack, but no one responded. He noted that there was no presence inside the first mate's house either. Deciding to check, he entered, only to find it completely empty. Annoyed, he left and struck another door. A middle-aged woman stumbled out, half awake and irritated, but her face froze when she saw him. She demanded to know why he had come to her hut. He immediately asked where the divine physician's granddaughter was. The woman hurriedly explained that Gamyang had gone to the battleship stationed in the middle of the river. After thanking her, the young man vanished without another word. The woman collapsed to the ground in relief, muttering that she truly needed to move away soon, fearing what would happen if she ever drew the attention of such a monstrous man. The young man rushed through the forest. Sensing the presence of other warriors nearby, he moved swiftly through the trees until he suddenly emerged from the bushes and halted, confusion crossing his face. He had sensed only 2 presences, yet 6 were here, including 2 that were already dead. His gaze dropped to Gamyang's body. Her skin had gone pale, her chest unmoving. She was dead. Rage exploded within him. He glared at Yowon and the others and demanded to know if they had killed her. Without waiting for an answer, he charged forward, drawing his massive greatsword and targeting Baekji, who stood closest to her body. The blade was enormous, nearly 2 meters long, and it came crashing down from above. Young Danhwa instantly rushed in to intercept. Blue force chi enveloped Danhwa's palm as he met the descending strike. The impact hurled the young man backward. He flipped through the air, landed hard, and slid across the ground before stopping. Despite this, the man grinned bitterly. He admitted inwardly that he had intended to eliminate the weaker one first. Baekji frowned at the remark, questioning what he meant by weak. Through telepathy, young Danhwa warned Baekji not to lower his guard, stating that the opponent was a level higher than him. Baekji was taken aback by the revelation. As Danhwa stared at the man, a distant memory surfaced. He recalled rumors of someone who wielded 2 great swords. The realization struck him all at once. The unrivaled sword. The 5 great martial artists were known across Murim as the Righteous North, Demonic South, Combative East, Proud West, and Dual Sender. No one remembered exactly when the title originated, but over time, they came to be collectively called the 5 great martial artists. artists. At the head stood the alliance leader and sect master of the righteous sword sect, Li Mok, known as the Righteous North Sword. Chun Yuzhong, the demonic South Master, had earned the title of Heavenly Demon after defeating the unorthodox faction alliance in the Battle of the Plains of Guizhou. Hang Yen, the proud West King, became the leader of the unorthodox faction alliance following a series of brutal conflicts. Countless rumors surrounded these figures, making it difficult to separate truth from exaggeration, though the combative East was widely believed to be the strongest martial artist even without weapons. Among them was the unrivaled sword, Junwang. Junwang had once belonged to the Hydra. In the past, when the river bandits were known as the 30 waterways rather than the 18, nearly 10,000 pirates dominated the Yellow River, tormenting both martial artists and the authorities. One day, after Junwang lost his mother for reasons unknown, his rage erupted. He slaughtered more than 3,000 pirates in a single campaign. After that massacre, the unorthodox faction came to resent him, while the orthodox faction rejected him for the sheer number of lives he had taken. Following several major battles, Junwang vanished from the world and his whereabouts became unknown. The young man clenched his teeth inwardly. His father had warned him never to use both greatswords unless he stood on the brink of death. Now, reality was forcing him to confront that warning. The one-eyed man before him was a superior martial artist, and the death of the first mate's wife was something he could no longer change. Faced with the situation, only one option remained. He decided to escape. The moment he turned to flee, Baekji pursued him. Baekji shouted that he had no right to run and launched a kick mid-chase. The man spun back and blocked the strike with his dual greatswords, retreating a step before swinging one blade at Baekji. Baekji dropped low beneath the arc and countered with a spinning kick, which the man narrowly avoided by bending down. The man realized inwardly that this was the opponent he had intended to target. Baekji appeared weaker than him, yet he was charging forward without hesitation, which made no sense. The young man brought his greatsword down again, only for Baekji's foot to crash into the blade. The impact sent powerful vibrations through the weapon and forced Baekji backward. The man's interest was piqued. He had not expected this level of strength. He acknowledged Baekji's skill with a grin. Baekji, however, understood the reality of the situation. His opponent's martial arts had clearly reached the ultimate supreme peak level. The man was stronger than him, wielding massive greatswords as though they were ordinary blades. Baekji knew that brute force would not be enough. He would have to create an opening, somehow, if he hoped to land a decisive strike. The young man called out to Baekji, drawing his attention. Baekji responded sharply, already irritated. The man explained that he was not retreating out of fear, but because he had urgent matters to attend to. Baekji clenched his teeth, realizing what the man meant. Without warning, the young man gathered sword force chi around both greatswords and leapt into the air. He slammed them down into the ground with tremendous force. The impact sent dust clouds, shattered rock, and sand blasting outward in every direction, obscuring the surroundings. Using the chaos as cover, the young man turned and fled. He focused on escaping, intending to inform his father that there was someone capable of recognizing his identity. But his thoughts were abruptly cut short when he saw a figure standing directly in his path. Yoan blocked his escape. Yoan stated calmly that they had already made it clear he would not be allowed to leave. Cursing under his breath, the young man raised both greatswords and unleashed a sword formation toward Yoan. As the twin blades came crashing down with immense force, Yoan simply extended his hand toward them. The young man scoffed inwardly, convinced no one could stop such power barehanded. The next instant, his confidence shattered. The swords froze in place, unable to move even a fraction, trapped by Yoan's grip. A chill ran through the young man as a terrifying realization struck him. This presence felt exactly like his father's. Yoan lifted his other hand and placed it against the young man's forehead. The young man barely managed to register the casual question before it happened. Yoan flicked his finger. The impact sent the young man flying backward. His body spun 3 times in midair before crashing to the ground. He tried to rise, but the blow had left him disoriented. His vision swam and he collapsed again, unable to regain balance. Yoan stepped forward and placed his hand over the young man's abdomen, preparing to destroy his internal energy. At that moment, young Danhwa urgently intervened and asked Yoan to stop. Yoan paused and looked at him. Danhwa explained that this man might not be connected to the Blue Heaven Society. When Yoan questioned the reasoning, Danhwa clarified his thought. The unrivaled sword was someone who had gone into hiding after being abandoned by both the Orthodox and unorthodox factions. Yoan stated that they would first uncover the man's identity and purpose. With that decision made, he sealed the man's blood points. Young Danhwa stepped forward and informed informed Yowon that he would handle the questioning himself. Yowon agreed without objection. Before long, the young man regained consciousness. Confusion filled his face as he looked down and realized his body had been bound. Panic crept in as fragmented memories returned. Inwardly, disbelief overwhelmed him. He had lost consciousness from nothing more than a flick of a finger. His father had always said he was strong enough that no one his age could rival him. Yet someone his own age had knocked him out effortlessly. Young Danwa's voice reached him, asking if he was awake. Startled, the young man tried to gather his internal energy, only to realize he could not circulate it at all. Alarm surged through him as he demanded to know what had been done. Danwa calmly informed him that his blood points had been sealed. The man grimaced and asked what they intended to do with him, fearing death. He hurriedly pleaded for his life, admitting that he had not intended for matters to escalate this way. Danwa responded coldly, stating that begging so boldly took nerve. He made it clear that killing him would be easy, but he had been left alive for questioning. The man immediately agreed to cooperate, promising to answer everything he knew. Danwa began by asking his name. The man introduced himself as Bunwang. Young Danwa frowned at the name, studying him more carefully. Yowon reflected inwardly that if this man were connected to the unrivaled sword, then the surname Wang made sense. It was likely that he was a disciple. Danwa then asked why Bunwang had attacked them. After a pause, Bunwang answered that it was because they had killed that woman. As expected, Danwa gestured behind him. Hobum stepped forward, holding a sleeping baby in his arms. Bunwang's eyes widened as he stared at the child, murmuring in recognition. Danwa confirmed it plainly. The baby was Gamyang's son. They had intended to save both mother and child, but everything had fallen apart because of that pirate. Young Danwa explained that they had been asked by Gamyang's grandmother to rescue both her and the child, but they had fallen into a trap and failed to save her. Hobum inwardly marveled at how convincingly Danwa delivered the lie, impressed by how naturally it flowed. Bunwang hesitated, then questioned whether her grandmother had truly sent them. Danwa responded calmly, pointing out that they were the ones holding him captive and had no reason to deceive him. That answer seemed to settle Bunwang's doubts. He apologized sincerely, admitting that he had misunderstood their intentions. Danwa noted inwardly that Bunwang had completely accepted the explanation. Danwa then asked why Bunwang had been searching for Gamyang in the first place. Bunwang answered with visible disappointment, stating that he needed her medicine. The answer made Danwa frown. He questioned what Bunwang meant by her medicine, realizing inwardly that they might not have been personally acquainted and that Bunwang had only been seeking her for medical reasons. Considering Gamyang was the divine physician's granddaughter, such a thing was plausible. Hobum, however, shook his head and muttered suspiciously, accusing Bunwang of being a drug addict. Bunwang exploded in anger and denied it outright. Danwa silenced Hobum and brought the conversation back on track. Danwa pressed further, asking what the medicine was needed for. Bunwang finally revealed that he had a younger sister who had been gravely ill for a long time. None of the physicians they consulted had been able to help her, but whenever she took medicine prepared by Gamyang, her condition would noticeably improve. Danwa acknowledged that this explained Bunwang's anger over Gamyang's death, though his suspicion remained. Bunwang had promised full cooperation, yet he was still being vague and far too relaxed for someone in his position. At that point, Yowon stepped in. He made it clear that Bunwang was mistaken if he believed this was a friendly exchange. Yowon warned that if Bunwang wished to leave alive, he needed to answer directly. Any more evasive responses would result in Yowon destroying his energy core and feeding him to the mountain beasts. Cold bloodlust poured out from Yowon. Sweat immediately streamed down Bunwang's face as he recoiled in terror. Yowon's tone left no room for doubt. Panicked, Bunwang admitted that his sister's illness was extremely serious. Danwa asked what sickness she suffered from. Bunwang answered that other people simply referred to it as a meridian collapse, but Gamyang had identified it more precisely. She had called it the 9-yin meridian collapse. Young Danwa stiffened in visible shock. Yowon, unfamiliar with the term, felt a spark of curiosity and immediately consulted NANO. NANO responded that there was no recorded data regarding an illness by that name. Yowon then asked young Danwa through telepathy if he understood what it meant. Danwa explained that a standard meridian collapse was a condition caused by excessive yin energy blocking the internal vessels. It most commonly affected female children. There was no cure, but those afflicted did not usually die from it and instead suffered throughout their lives. However, the 9-yin meridian collapse was fundamentally different. Those born with it were said to possess an almost infinite amount of yin energy, far surpassing what a human body could endure. As that energy continued to grow stronger with time, the balance within the body steadily collapsed. Most who suffered from it died before reaching the age of 20 due to complete internal destabilization. Even Danwa admitted that he had never heard of the disease existing in reality before now. Bunwang's expression darkened after hearing the explanation repeated aloud. He recalled that he had already used all the medicine Gam Miang had given him, yet his sister's seizures were only becoming more frequent. He felt cornered, unsure of what to do next. His thoughts drifted back to Danhwa's earlier claim that they had come to rescue Gam Miang at her grandmother's request. With hesitation, Bunwang carefully asked whether her grandmother was also a physician. Yowon and young Danhwa exchanged telepathic messages in silence. Both instantly recognized the opportunity forming before them. If Bunwang's sister truly suffered from such a condition, then helping her could forge a powerful connection. Whether Bunwang was truly related to Junwang or not, he was already a formidable warrior worth keeping close. Yowon gave a subtle nod. He answered aloud, confirming that Gam Miang's grandmother was not merely a physician, but a far superior one. After all, Gam Miang herself had learned everything she knew from her. Bunwang's face lit up with sudden hope as he asked whether they could ask Gam Miang's grandmother to treat his sister. Before he could finish, a terrifying surge of energy erupted without warning. A chilling pressure swept across the mountain like an explosion, freezing the air itself. Everyone instinctively turned toward the northwest. Bunwang's expression collapsed into horror. He inwardly cursed as panic seized him, realizing that it had only been 4 hours since he had given his sister the medicine. Young Danhwa sensed the disturbance and reported that the source was not far from their location. Yowon felt the overwhelming cold energy as well. Even if the source was nearby, the clarity and density of the yin energy were beyond anything he had expected. Bunwang shouted that it was his sister. Her yin energy had exploded out of control. Young Danhwa was stunned. This level of yin energy far exceeded what he had imagined, even for someone suffering from the 9 yin meridian collapse. Desperation overtook Bunwang as he begged to be untied, insisting that his sister would die if he did not immediately suppress her blood vessels. Yowon acted at once and released his seals. The moment Bunwang's internal energy began circulating again, it tore apart the ropes binding him. Yowon ordered him to lead the way. Bunwang did not hesitate. He rushed toward the source of the disturbance, with Yowon and Baekji following closely. Young Danhwa and Hobum were ordered to remain behind and protect the baby. After traveling roughly 3 miles through the mountains, they arrived at the location. Though it was late spring and the surrounding forest was lush with green, the area before them felt like deep winter. The ground was frozen solid, bushes coated in white frost, and the air was painfully cold. Baekji stared in disbelief each time his breath turned white as he exhaled. At the heart of the frozen zone stood a woman. Yowon felt his breath catch as he saw her. She was beautiful, with long silver hair flowing behind her. An immense current of energy revolved around her body, freezing the air itself. Debris caught within that flow turned solid mid-air as it followed her path. Yowon inwardly noted that the air around her was visibly warping. The density of her core energy was beyond belief. Bunwang shouted her name, calling out desperately to Yogun. She did not respond. She continued walking forward as if she could not hear anything at all. Bunwang declared that she had lost her mind and that he would have to seal her down to block the energy flow. Yowon sensed something deeply wrong and tried to stop him, but Bunwang was already running straight toward his sister. The cold was unbearable. Even as he poured every shred of his internal energy into protecting his body, it was not enough. The freezing air bit into Bunwang relentlessly as he forced himself closer. He called out to Yogun at close range, desperately begging her to wake up, but she continued walking as if she could not hear him at all. Grinding his teeth, Bunwang pushed past the floating shards of ice and reached out to restrain her. He resolved to put her to sleep, even if only for a moment. The instant he moved closer, sharp ice tore into his skin, ripping flesh as he reached for her. Pain tore through him. Yogun suddenly turned. Her face locked onto him and her eyes, completely white, stared straight through him. She seized his wrist. The moment her grip tightened, overwhelming yin energy flooded into Bunwang's body. Ice rapidly crept up his arm, freezing his wrist solid. He screamed in agony, shouting her name and begging her to stop. No matter how desperately he tried to raise his internal energy, it was completely overwhelmed. Panic took hold. Realizing he would freeze to death at this rate, Bunwang forced energy into his leg and kicked out in desperation. But the kick never reached her. A wall of ice instantly formed in front of her, blocking the strike entirely. Before he could react, Yogun grabbed his other shoulder. Cold energy surged through him again, spreading faster this time. Terror filled his eyes as his body began to shut down. She had completely lost herself. Bunwang's screams echoed through the frozen air as he realized he was about to die by his own sister's hands. That was when Yowon descended. He tore straight through the swirling ice debris from above and landed between them. Yogun's empty white gaze snapped toward him at once. Yowon grabbed the hand, pressing into up Bunwang's shoulder and spoke calmly, telling her to stop. Yogun immediately unleashed her cold energy toward him. Bunwang shouted a warning, but the attack never reached its target. The energy was blocked completely, unable to penetrate Yowon's body. The wrist Yowon held began to heat up instead. Yowon repeated the command, his voice steady. He thrust his palm toward her chest. At the last instant, white frost surged forward and formed a dense ice barrier around her body. Yowon narrowed his eyes, intrigued. He halted his strike and sent energy into his palm, forcing it through the barrier in a single push. In that brief moment, Yogun released Bunwang and swung her arm at Yowon. A storm of freezing air exploded outward. The force hurled both Yowon and Bunwang backward. His arms nearly frozen solid, lost his balance, and was sent flying. Baekji rushed in instantly and caught him before he could crash to the ground. Baekji felt a chill run through him as he realized the scale of her power. Yogun's yin energy was strong enough to distort the atmosphere itself, and strong enough to drive Yowon back. Bunwang thanked him weakly. Baekji saw it clearly now. The man was not arrogant or cruel by nature. Everything before had been desperation and misunderstanding. Bunwang stared down at his frozen arms in pain. Without saying a word, Baekji sent his own internal energy into the frozen limbs, carefully raising their temperature to prevent further damage. Bunwang looked at him with sincere gratitude and called him a good man. Baekji merely raised an eyebrow and told him to stop talking and focus on circulating his energy properly. Bunwang insisted that there was no time to waste, knowing the situation would only worsen if his sister was not stopped. Deep down, he understood the truth with painful clarity. The last time he had managed to restrain her, he had not been alone. Now, with his father absent, there was no one else capable of handling Yogun's overwhelming yin energy. Yowon drew his saber, bracing himself against the freezing pressure that continued to intensify. Bunwang had expected Yowon to be strong, but this far exceeded his expectations. Baekji quietly remarked that if Yowon could not stop it, then all of them would be in grave danger, though even as he thought it, he doubted such an outcome. Bunwang sensed the trust in Baekji's words. To Baekji, Yowon was what Bunwang's father was to him. As Yowon continued to endure the cold, Yogun's white eyes began to change, turning translucent. At the same time, the atmosphere grew increasingly violent. Yowon frowned as he assessed the phenomenon. Her energy showed no sign of diminishing. Instead, it continued to grow stronger the more yin energy she released. This was no cultivated power refined through years of training. It existed on an entirely different plane. Yogun raised her hand toward the air. Frost condensed instantly, forming hundreds of sharp ice particles suspended around her. With a single motion, Yogun clenched her hand. The ice descended all at once, converging on Yowon from every direction. Before anyone could intervene, the frozen barrage was already upon him. Yowon issued a command to NANO, activating augmented reality and mapping the trajectories of every incoming shard. NANO complied instantly, overlaying precise pathways across his vision. What appeared to be an inescapable prison of ice now revealed narrow gaps invisible to the naked eye. Yowon moved. He surged forward, slipping through the only viable path. The moment ice touched his blade, it shattered instantly. Yogun's eyes trembled as she realized Yowon was closing the distance. She raised her other hand and the ground responded. The earth shook violently as an enormous wall of ice erupted upward from below, blocking his advance. Baekji stared in stunned disbelief as the frozen barrier towered into existence. Yowon immediately recognized the opening. He swung the white dragon blade. Blue force chi surged outward and sliced cleanly through the ice wall, splitting it apart and crashing it down in fragments. In the same motion, Yowon shot straight through the collapsing barrier. Yogun reacted a fraction too late. She tried to force more energy out to defend herself, but Yowon was already in front of her. His left hand struck directly into the blood point on her chest. The flow of yin energy was disrupted instantly, and the suffocating cold began to recede. Even so, Yowon felt resistance. He had never needed to use more than half his power to seal even a superior master-level warrior. This time, he had already used 70%, and her energy was still thrashing violently inside her body. Yowon increased his output to 90%. Only then did Yogun's body finally go limp. Her eyelids closed, and she collapsed unconscious. Yowon exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders. She had finally been subdued. Baekji and Bunwang rushed over at once. Bunwang stared at Yowon in disbelief and spoke with excitement, unable to hide his amazement at what he had just witnessed. Yowon noticed that Bunwang was not unharmed. His right arm moved stiffly and unnaturally. Baekji sent internal energy into it to stabilize the damage, but proper treatment would still be required. Yogun's condition was far more severe. With the flow of yin energy forcibly sealed, her veins were swelling unnaturally beneath her skin. The berserk yin energy was still raging inside her body with nowhere to escape. Yowon immediately ordered that they move back to the outpost. Baekji nodded without hesitation. Yowon lifted lifted Yogun over his shoulder. Bunwang panicked and demanded to know what Yowon planned to do with his sister. Yowon stated plainly that he was taking her to Gamyang's grandmother. Bunwang hesitated, fear and doubt mixing in his voice as he questioned whether even such a skilled physician could truly help his sister. Yowon answered honestly, if even the divine physician could not treat her condition, then there was no hope left. He urged Bunwang to follow and stop wasting time. The mention of the divine physician stunned Bunwang into silence. Yowon leapt forward without another word. Bunwang stood frozen until Baekji spoke beside him, explaining that Gamyang had been the divine physician's granddaughter. The truth hit Bunwang hard. He realized that she had never once mentioned such a thing during all the times he had visited her for medicine. In hindsight, it made sense. He had been using her to keep his sister alive. There was no reason for her to reveal her background. Baekji cut off his thoughts sharply and told him to hurry. There was no time to stand there in shock. With that, they moved, racing against time, carrying the last fragile hope for Yogun's life. After rejoining the rest of his companions, Chun Yowon moved without delay and secured a dock that was still operating late into the night. They crossed the Yellow River safely and immediately pushed their bodies to the limit, using stepping techniques to race toward the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult branch located in the northernmost region of Honam. By the time dawn arrived, they had already reached their destination. Despite the early hour, Yowon's arrival threw the outpost into motion. Cultists poured out in great numbers and bowed deeply in unison, pledging their loyalty and reverence to their lord. The sight of hundreds kneeling at once turned the entrance into something overwhelming. Bunwang was left stunned. Only now did he fully grasp who Yowon truly was. The man he had compared to his father was none other than the demon lord of the demonic cult itself. In his shock, Bunwang convinced himself that such power could only belong to someone who had undergone body reconstruction to reclaim youth. Yowon wasted no time. He immediately demanded the whereabouts of the divine physician. A cultist informed him that she was currently staying at the guest house and guided him there at once. As they moved through the outpost, Yowon instructed young Danhwa and Baekji to remain in a separate building with the baby and the body. Yogun's condition took priority, and there was no time to explain the events at the Dragon Tiger Claw to Gamrosu yet. That matter would be dealt with later. They soon arrived at a patio where Gamrosu, Munku, and Ho Sanghwa were having a meal. Munku noticed Yowon immediately and rushed forward in relief, but her expression quickly changed when she saw the unconscious silver-haired woman in his arms. Confusion and unease rose within her as she stared at Yogun. Before any questions could be raised directly, Gamrosu was already tending to Yogun. Munku watched anxiously, unable to understand why Yowon had brought an unfamiliar woman here, especially one whose presence felt so unsettling. Hobum noticed Munku's concern and quietly explained everything that had happened, including Yogun's condition and the reason Yowon had brought her. As the explanation continued, Munku's tension eased. She realized Yowon had not acted out of personal interest or temptation. Feeling embarrassed by her own momentary jealousy, she relaxed. However, her relief did not last long. Hobum then mentioned that he had once read about a way to treat the 9 yin meridian collapse by forcibly balancing it with an overwhelming source of yang energy. Munku, confused, questioned him what he meant by that. Hobum, clearly enjoying himself, teasingly implied the union of man and woman as the method. Munku reacted instantly, mortified and furious, and shut him down before he could go any further. Unbeknownst to them, Yowon had overheard every telepathic exchange and found himself unsettled. Gamrosu let out a long breath as she examined Yogun and recognized the condition before her. She admitted that she never expected to encounter the 9 yin meridian collapse again. Bunwang sensed the gravity in her reaction and wondered if the situation was truly that dire. Gamrosu explained that someone had clearly administered medicine designed to stimulate Yogun's young energy. That intervention had delayed the progression of the illness and extended her life. Bunwang immediately realized that the medicine had come from Gamyang, but he suppressed the urge to speak. Yowon had already warned him that if he wanted Yogun to be saved, he needed to remain silent about certain truths. Yowon pressed Gamrosu further, asking whether this meant she had treated such a case before. Gamrosu hesitated, then admitted that she had not succeeded in doing so. Bunwang's frustration surged at that revelation, but Gamrosu continued before his emotions could overwhelm him. She explained that the first time she had encountered a patient with the 9 yin meridian collapse had been 30 years earlier. Even then, she had understood the theoretical principles behind treatment. However, the disorder only manifested in martial artists who cultivated inner energy, which made it exceptionally difficult to manage. No medicine alone could resolve it. The only possible approach was to force open the blocked vessels using an immense source of yang energy. The problem lay in finding someone whose yang energy was powerful enough to counterbalance the raging yin energy. Bunwang realized what that implied and understood that she had failed to find such a person. Gamrosu confirmed this. She recalled that she had searched everywhere and ultimately sought help from the abbot of Shaolin at the time, one of the 5 great martial artists of that era. He had been renowned as the most powerful internal martial artist, having reached the highest realm of inner cultivation. True to his Buddhist nature, he had agreed to help without hesitation. His inner energy contained overwhelming yang energy, enough to suppress the berserk yin energy. However, the patient's body could not endure it. Her vessels collapsed under the clash of forces, and she died instantly. Though it was not the abbot's fault, the guilt drove him to step down from his position. That woman had been the first patient Gamrosu had failed to save in her entire career. Bunwang could not accept that outcome and believed the method itself must have been flawed. He desperately wanted to know whether a better approach existed. Gamrosu stated that a true physician must confront their failures. She recalled the abbot's own conclusion. Forcing open the vessels with powerful yang energy only provoked an even fiercer backlash from the yin energy, which in turn compelled the yang to surge higher. The patient's vessel simply could not withstand the collision of 2 overwhelming forces. If that method was impossible, Bunwang wondered how the illness could ever be treated. Gamrosu explained that there were 2 possible methods. One was effectively impossible under the current circumstances. The other did exist, but it came with a cost so severe that neither Bunwang nor Yogen would willingly accept it. Bunwang demanded to know what the method was. Gamrosu explained that by coincidence, the origin point of the yin energy explosion lay within the woman's womb. From there, she clarified the implication. The method involved easing the pressure on the veins by allowing yang energy to enter her body naturally, creating a balance between yin and yang. Her gaze shifted toward Yowon, indicating that someone with sufficiently powerful yang energy was already present. Yowon immediately rejected the implication and instead asked about the other method, the one Gamrosu had described as impossible. Before she could answer, Yowon abruptly stood. His expression hardened as his gaze fixed on a distant point within the outpost. An overwhelming presence was approaching. The pressure was immense, more dangerous than even Yogen's berserk state, and yet no one else had noticed it. That alone meant the intruder's realm was high enough that only Yowon could sense it. Munku rose in confusion, but Yowon warned everyone to remain where they were and not move. Without another word, he leapt away. Every martial artist possessed a unique chi signature, much like a scent. Those trained deeply in inner energy could distinguish one from another. As one's realm increased, that perception expanded. At the mystic realm, it became possible to sense even the residual traces of chi left behind in nature itself. Elsewhere, a man was moving at terrifying speed. He ran with his hands gathered behind his back, his body leaning forward as he tore through the terrain. His movement was slightly unbalanced, not from weakness, but from the fury burning inside him. His chi traced southwest, chasing the lingering imprint of those who had taken his children. He vowed that whoever was responsible would pay the price. His expression was cold, but his inner turmoil was violent. When Junwang had returned from his travels, he found his hideout destroyed, frozen solid with ice. From that alone, he realized his daughter's yin energy had gone berserk. The traces told him she had been stopped by an unknown warrior. That uncertainty gnawed at him. Following the trail, his vision soon caught sight of a vast compound. The gate bore the words of the demonic cult. The lingering cold trace flowed directly into the outpost. His face twisted with grim certainty. They were involved. Whether expected or not no longer mattered. There was no one left in this world he feared. With that thought, Junwang surged forward, charging straight toward the demonic cult's outpost. The guards at the outpost stepped forward and blocked his path, demanding that he stop and explain himself. Junwang answered by ordering them to move. In the next instant, the guards were struck down. Blood sprayed as they collapsed onto the ground. Even the gatekeepers of the outpost, warriors trained to a high standard, were utterly helpless before him. More guards rushed in, shouting in outrage and demanding to know who he was to barge in like this. Force chi erupted from Junwang's hand. With a single sweeping motion, he cut them down and commanded them to get out of his way. The outpost leader, Jiheng, finally stepped forward and shouted for him to halt, demanding whether he even understood where he was standing. Junwang's internal energy flared violently as he warned Jiheng instead. If they did not want to end up the same way, they were to bring his children to him immediately. Jiheng shouted back in confusion and anger, demanding to know why Junwang was looking for his children there, who he was, and why he refused to cooperate. Junwang dismissed him, stating that if they intended to deny it, then he would simply find his children on his own. He stepped forward. Jiheng gave the signal to attack. All the warriors charged at once. Junwang swung his hand, and in that instant, every sword held by the charging warriors was torn from their grips. Shock spread across their faces as their weapons floated into the air, then turned and pointed back at them. Realization struck. This was an air sword technique. Panic set in as they understood the truth. They were facing a martial artist of the mystic realm. Junwang issued his final warning. Anyone who stood in his way would die. Jiheng roared back that even if Junwang was a supreme master, he was underestimating them far too much. As members of the heavenly demon cult, they would not kneel or retreat. Junwang declared their defiance foolish. He had given them a chance to live, and they had thrown it away. He raised his hand. The swords trembled, ready to strike. Some warriors closed their eyes. Others tried desperately to dodge. Then, something impossible happened. The swords moved only an inch and stopped. Confusion rippled through the warriors. Junwang's expression twisted as his hand shook, as if something invisible were gripping it. He realized with disbelief that someone was interfering with his control over the swords, invading his connection itself. That should not have been possible. His gaze snapped toward the mansion. From within the outpost, Chun Yowon stepped forward. Junwang stared at Yowon in disbelief, realizing that the interference had come from him. Nano's report echoed in Yowon's mind, confirming that the control system had been fully infiltrated. At Yowon's silent command, Nano initiated the counterattack. In an instant, control over the air sword shifted. Yowon extended his will outward, and all 40 swords snapped around, their tips now aimed directly at Junwang. Junwang froze. For the first time in his life, he had lost control of air swords while actively wielding them. The realization shook him deeply. To seize control of so many swords at once required terrifying precision and an unimaginable level of energy manipulation. The feat left him genuinely stunned. As Yowon stepped forward, the answer became clear. The warriors and outpost captain Jiheng immediately recognized him. One by one, they dropped to one knee and bowed, calling out to their lord in unison. Junwang understood at once. He had heard rumors that the new master of the heavenly demon divine cult was a young man. If so, then this could only be the one who had overpowered his daughter. Jiheng quickly reported the situation, explaining how this man had forced his way into the outpost, struck down the gatekeepers and guards, and demanded the return of his children. Yowon listened in silence, his suspicion settling into certainty. With Yogun's condition and Bunwang's twin great swords in mind, the man's identity had already been clear. There was no room for doubt. It was Junwang, the leader of the unrivaled sword. Shock rippled through the outpost. There was not a single person in Murim who did not know that name. One of the 5 great martial artists, the man who had slaughtered over 3,000 pirates in a single night. Junwang assessed the situation instantly. Since Yowon knew who he was, there was no point in concealment. A full battle here would force him to expend enormous chi, and the cult's elite would inevitably intervene. With his children inside the outpost, such a confrontation would place him at a severe disadvantage. He withdrew his energy. The tension in the courtyard loosened as the air swords fell lifelessly to the ground. Yowon released his control as well, allowing the warriors to recover their weapons. Yowon instructed Jiheng to tend to the fallen guards. Jiheng realized only then that they were alive, merely unconscious. Junwang had deliberately held back. He had sensed his children's presence and avoided killing anyone, unwilling to provoke irreversible hostility while they were still alive. Yowon acknowledged this restraint with a respectful bow. Junwang then formally introduced himself, offering courtesy despite the circumstances. He explained that he could sense his children within the outpost and demanded an explanation for why they had been brought here. Yowon responded with calm sincerity. He acknowledged the misunderstanding and explained that Junwang's daughter had been in an extremely critical state. There had been no choice but to rush her to the outpost immediately to prevent her death. Junwang was about to explain that he had physicians of his own when his expression abruptly stiffened. A surge of cold energy erupted without warning, and the temperature around them plunged instantly. Yowon felt it at the same moment and turned sharply toward the guest house. The seals had broken again. Yowon moved first, rushing toward the guest house at full speed, with Junwang following closely behind. As they approached, waves of freezing air lashed out from the building, coating the surroundings in ice. In the courtyard, Hobom was already injured, blood staining his lips as he positioned himself protectively in front of Gamrosu. Facing Yogun directly were Monku and Ho Sangwa. Both of them looked strained, having realized too late how severe the situation truly was. Yogun had awakened and immediately lost control. The moment Yogun moved, the ground reacted. White ice needles erupted upward and shot toward them in a dense barrage. Monku and Ho Sangwa leapt away at the same time, narrowly avoiding the attack as the needles pierced the ground where they had been standing. Monku counterattacked midair, releasing a chi projectile toward Yogun, but it dissipated before it could even reach her body. The impossibility of that result sent a chill through her. Yogun gathered her hands and a freezing storm exploded outward. The blast struck Munku and Ho Sanghwa while they were still airborne. Both hurriedly raised energy barriers, but the impact still hurled them backward. They rolled across the frozen ground before forcing themselves back to their feet. What stunned them was the sudden stillness. The countless ice needles that should have followed never came. Confusion spread through them as they realized the level of power they were facing. This was not something that could be explained by ordinary martial arts. It felt as though they were confronting a being born of winter itself. Ho Sanghwa reinforced her massive axe with dense force chi, while Munku gathered her own energy, preparing for another desperate strike. Before either could move, the ice needles suspended around them froze in midair. A calm voice came from behind them, noting how close the timing had been. Yowon stood between them and Yogun, having intercepted the attack at the last possible moment. But he was not alone. Junwang stepped forward and swept his hand through the air. A powerful line of energy carved across the space in front of him, shattering every frozen needle into fine dust. Yoan watched the display in stunned silence. The precision and raw dominance of Junwang's control made one thing clear to him. If Junwang had chosen to, he could have countered even Yoan's air swords head on. Junwang called out Yogun's name, his concern unmistakable as he took in her condition. He had expected the severe cold to have taken a toll on her, but what he saw was far worse than he had imagined. There was no time to hesitate. He surged forward. Sensing the overwhelming pressure approaching her, Yogun instinctively reacted. Ice dust gathered violently around her, beginning to form a thick defensive wall. Junwang reached her before the wall could fully take shape. The ice needles erupting from the ground shattered into dust the moment they rose. He pressed his fingers into Yogun's blood points, attempting to seal her meridians. What once required only half of his strength no longer worked. Her raging yin chi resisted his interference on its own, forcefully rejecting his energy. She had deteriorated further. Junwang increased his power to nearly 80% and struck her blood points again. This time, the seal took effect. Yogun's body jerked once before going limp, and the overwhelming cold finally began to subside. She collapsed unconscious, her body trembling violently as if frozen from the inside. Junwang's expression darkened. He had never seen her in such a critical state. Despair crept into his thoughts. Reaching the Dragon Tiger Claw would take at least half a day, and at this rate, she would not survive that long. At that moment, a muscular elderly woman approached with Yowon at her side. Gamrosu knelt beside Yogun and carefully examined her pulse. After a long moment, her expression turned grim. She concluded that Yogun's yin energy had spread throughout her entire body. If things continued as they were, Yogun would not survive even half a day. There was no longer any room for alternatives. The only remaining method was to forcibly restore balance between yin and yang energy. Those words struck Junwang like a blade. Shock and fury surged through him, and he grabbed Gamrosu by the collar, his composure finally breaking as fear for his daughter overwhelmed him. Before the situation could spiral further, Bunwang shouted in alarm. He urgently revealed the truth that Junwang had been missing all along. The woman he had seized in desperation was the very person he had been searching for all this time. She was the divine physician herself. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.